Hi guys, my name is Micke Johansson and I run my studio here in Sweden in the glass area. And today we're gonna watch a video that was recorded in Corning 2017. I'm gonna make a Swedish drum and REL with 2 layers of air patterns inside, a double REL. And that one was one of the first made outside Sweden. And I'm really looking forward to chat with you guys when you're watching it. Enjoy.
And I would encourage you all to come close and check this out. There's also some other pieces in the cases over here that Mika made in the last few days. But you can see he's trapped air bubbles in the shape of frogs and ferns in this. And this is a single REL, so it's a 1 layer of imagery trapped in the glass. What he's doing now is a technique that he's invented himself based on this traditional Swedish technique called double REL. So he's actually doing 2 layers of bubbles. So the process involves creating a color blank, which is layers of colored glass, carving through it with a sandblaster in a specific pattern. You know, this one he carved ferns through the first layer, and then the second layer he carved frogs into it. So the glass is hot, it's made, it cools down, you carve it in a cold state, then you bring it back up to temperature, and you put another layer on it, trapping air bubbles in the first layer, and then the second layer is heated up, or it's cooled down, carved again, and then it's brought back up again. So it's like a 5-stage process. So it takes a lot of time. The blanks that Mika is picking up already probably have about a day or 2 worth of work already in them. So it's a precarious situation. He has to be very careful. He doesn't want to heat them up too fast. He doesn't want them to crack. So he wants everything to stay together. And one of the characteristics of Swedish glass and traditional Swedish glass is it's very heavy. You can see the layers that are inside, and you can see there's a big sham or a lot of clear glass on the bottom of the piece. So they're usually quite heavy, but they show the depth, and they use the glass for its clarity to show layering. All right. So we've all gotten to try some of these techniques. It's been very exciting for us. This is not the typical way we blow glass here. This is very typical of Swedish glass blowing. And the region of Sweden where Mika lives used to be populated by over 60 glass houses. And now I think there's 1 or 2 left. But Mika learned to blow glass at Orrefors, which is a very old factory in Sweden. And he learned to blow glass in a factory, and maybe about 16 years or so ago, or 15 years ago, he decided to move out on his own and start making his own glass. Now he has his own studio on his own property. He lives out in the woods in southern Sweden, and I think he likes it quite well. All right, so Mika has a blowpipe here. And he gathered just a little bit of glass on the end. Now this glass on the end is just enough for him to stick to the blank that he's heated up. And he's going to do that here in just a little bit. You can see behind the bench there's a small square box there, a metal box with some handles on it. It's got wheels on it too. That's called our pickup oven. And inside of that pickup oven, sitting at 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, is the blank that he made, the REL blank, that he's going to be making the double REL pattern with. What do you have on the, what's on there? Okay. Okay. Oh, that's the one with the sharks? Okay. All right, so Mika was just telling me what the imagery was on the piece he's going to be picking up, and it's an underwater scene. So you have a sunken Viking ship in the background. So that's all created out of air trapped between layers. And then in front of that, on the second layer, which makes it a double Ariel, or air bubbles trapped in the pattern of fish swimming around it, and coral. So you have two different layers. And it's a really unique way to make the glass. So here he's just basically making what's called the moil, or the glass that holds onto the blowpipe. And he's going to get that just to the right shape so he can pick up the blank that he has worked on for the past couple of days. So in the American glass studios, we call this a post or a collar on the end of the blowpipe. Mika says in Sweden they call it the navel, like the belly button. And you can see it kind of looks like a belly button. You see the hole of the blowpipe right in the end there. So helping Mika tonight is Tom Ryder. He's operating the doors there for Mika. Over to the left side of the stage is George Kinnard. And then at this workstation over here is Chris Rochelle. And these are all members of the team here at Corning Museum. That's right. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, Amy. My name's Jeff. If you have any questions, just let me know, and I'll be happy to answer them if I can, or I'll ask Mika if I don't know the answer. Yes? How does he form the air bubbles? Well, that's a great question. I'm actually going to grab this piece and carry it out with me so you guys can see it up close. I'll answer that question in just a moment. So here you can see, so all that imagery is just trapped air between the layers. And how does he do it? Well, he makes what's called a blank, which is probably about half the volume of this, half the size. And it has a couple different layers of colors in it. And one of the layers is applied using what's called a technique that's called a Swedish Overlay. So you can get the colored glass in the very outside layer, like a skin or a veneer. And then when that's cooled down, he just breaks it off the blowpipe. And then when it cools down, he wraps it up with tape, a special kind of tape, and then draws a pattern on there, whether it's a frog or a fern. And then he takes a knife and he cuts that out. And wherever it's cut out, he goes into the sandblasting room in the cabinet and he sandblasts away that layer. So he carves it up to, a couple centimeters, almost a ½ inch deep into the glass. So then when he heats that up again and layers more glass over it, it traps air in those layers. So he puts another veneer over it. It's very complicated. It's a multi-stage technique, and I hope I'm explaining it so it makes sense, but I don't know. We'll see. Yes, you've probably seen this.
Incredible. Thank you.
Yeah. So this is some of the artist's work, Mika Johansen. So all that imagery is air trapped inside of the glass.
When they're putting bubbles in, how do they get an array of bubbles?
How do you get an array of bubbles? Well, there's a couple different ways to do that. But basically, you're making impressions in the glass, and then you layer more glass over it. The glass is kind of thick, so it doesn't flow in the impressions, so it traps air between the layers. But it all has to do with layering the glass. And this piece, let's see, it probably has about 6 layers of glass on here. Yeah. Yeah, it's very heavy, too. You guys want to take a look at that? See the frog, and so there's different layers there. This might just be one layer. I think this is a single Ariel. So Ariel is the technique for trapping precision air traps, and that's a Swedish technique. Hey, Brian. Good, how are you? Check that out.
That's so beautiful.
Isn't that cool?
It's really different.
Yeah, very heavy.
Get in trouble for talking and
Not this time. Isn't that cool? Karen, see? Yes, of course.
So this is inside the glass.
That's right. Yep, it's air bubbles trapped between the layers of glass.
How do they get to make a design?
How do you make the design? Well, the way you do it is you layer the glass, and then the first couple layers he sand carves away the imagery, and then when he layers more glass over it, traps air into the sort of trenches that the sandblasting leave.
And so what's the technique called?
It's called Ariel. Ariel. Yeah, like the Little Mermaid. And Mika has taken the technique sort of to another level. So he's taken Ariel, and he does what's called the double Ariel. So he does it again. So he puts another layer on and carves through again, and he gets more layering effect. Yeah, it's more three-dimensional. And I think there's a double Ariel that's over here with a seahorse in it, and you could see. Say again?
How does it differ from Graal?
So the way Ariel differs from Graal is that Graal is carved and it's left on the outside. So the carving's on the outside. And the cool thing about it is you're going to get to see both techniques tonight. So the first pickup he's doing is an Ariel blank, and he's going to finish a double Ariel piece this evening. You'll see a Swedish Overlay, which is a totally new technique for us here, and that's something we learned about with his residency here. And you can see George has the blank on the end of the blowpipe there. They picked that up out of an oven. Now that was at 1,000 degrees in that oven, and he's being very careful not to get that too hot. And Mika has formed a bubble. They're going to basically push it over that one, like putting on a stocking. And they'll just push it over that, and that'll act like a veneer that goes over the trench that he's sand carved away in the different imagery. And when it goes over that, it traps the air. He can continue to gather more glass over it. So that's Ariel. The Graal blank is carved away, but the carving is left on the outside. So the Ariel, you don't get to really inflate. You don't give it a lot of volume. The volume is left small, but the thickness of the glass is kind of where the art is, you know, if that makes sense.
Is that on the inside? Can I?
No, yeah, no, it's smooth on the inside, it's smooth on the outside, but this piece is over an inch thick. So it's like that thick. So it's really heavy. Yeah. I better put it down before I drop it. Hey. Yes, let's show it to. Should I show it to John? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Getting a shot of this piece here. All right, so they're going to swing the camera over here, so you folks out on the internet who are watching can see what we're talking about here. You can see the imagery that's in here is actually air bubbles trapped between the layers of glass. Yep. So this is a big moment here. This is called a Swedish Overlay. This technique, and this is very, very important to get this just right, because if he doesn't, this is where things can go horribly wrong, and the imagery can get distorted, or the air can get trapped wrong, and you can have what looks like a turtle instead of a fox. So we'll see how it goes here. But basically, George, who's at the furnace right now, reheating a round bubble, is going to bring that over. They're going to push it onto the bottom of the bubble that Mika has, and then you'll see him break it off of George's pipe, heat it back up, and then he'll just kind of roll it over the surface like a thin veneer. It's almost like putting a sock on. All right, here it goes. Everything has to be just right. So you can see where the glass is glowing orange. That's where it's flexible and hot. The glass up around the pipe there is brittle, so he's able to break it free. And he's got it partially on there. And the next move, he's going to start to open that up, but he's got a special tool he'll use called a Swedish Overlay, an overlay spade. And it's basically like our jacks, which is just a spring tool, kind of like this one. These are wood jacks. They have wooden blades. But the set he has there is special for cupping around the bubble. I don't want to mess it up, but this is what it looks like. So it's a totally different tool. It's something we've not seen before. Mika's been working with us here. So he's going to get that nice and hot. When he comes out, you'll see that bubble that George brought over is going to be glowing quite a bit. It's going to be really flexible, and he'll be able to push that back nice and smooth. He makes it look really easy. This is a technique he's been doing for a long time, but I can tell you it's not. We've all tried it. Everybody on the team has probably tried at least one of these overlays, and it's pretty tricky. It takes a touch, a fine touch. Here he goes. No stress. So it's putting off a lot of heat there. Chris is holding that paddle just to shield Mika's hand from the intense heat of pushing that bubble back over. So essentially he's turning that bubble inside out. And this is the sombrero stage. Looks like a little sombrero on there, a bowler hat. There we go. Halfway done. And he's got another tool that he'll pull out. It's called the finishing jacks. And it kind of looks like a big crab claw, and he'll use that just to flap over the very end that's still opened up. Yes, Carol? How long do they last? You know, that's a good question, because we're trying to order some, so it'd be good to know that. I would imagine it probably last him a couple of years. I'll ask him after he finishes. You know, I'm not sure. He was just telling me today, though, in Sweden, like here we use cherry wood and apple wood for our wooden tools. He says in Sweden, a lot of what they use is alder wood. And they like to use alder because you can let the wood dry out, and it cracks just like cherry or pear or anything like that. But then when you wet it up again, it goes back. It has like a memory. It goes right back to where it was, whereas cherry, pear, the other fruit woods don't really do that. So these are the finishing jacks. This is helping him get that last little bit over, and it's very critical he gets everything sealed in there. And everything's spinning really fast right now. You can't really see what's going on, but after he gets that overlay completed, you're going to see that image in bubbles magically appear. There you can see some of the texture of the shipwreck, which is a Viking ship. So again, the imagery that he has in this, it's two layers. The first layer, the inside layer, is a Viking shipwreck on the bottom of the sea. And then the next layer has some coral, and it has sharks swimming around it. So it's cool. It's very cool. But he does all kinds of imagery. So here we got this sort of rainforest imagery, a lot of nautical themes. And, you know, one of the things that's easy to overlook, Mika is a master glassblower, but he's also an incredible draftsman. And, you know, we ask him, oh, where do you get the images, or where do you come up with it? Is it, you know, he says he just goes for it. You know, he thinks about it. Sometimes he looks at some pictures and synthesizes what he sees. But it's to get it so it looks right in an air bubble pattern is pretty tricky. And it takes a lot of practice and imagination to know how and synthesize these images so that they end up in air bubble form. And I think that's one of the most impressive things after watching Miko work for a couple weeks. You know, we see a lot of the hot working, and then he goes away at night. He goes back to his hotel room and tapes up the pieces and draws them out. So he's been working pretty much the whole nonstop the whole time he's been here, and he's made a lot of incredible pieces. Here's a couple here. These don't involve Graal or Ariel, but he got the color effects using the Swedish Overlay technique. So you get sort of this three-dimensionality to the coloration, a lot of depth in this type of work. All right, so here he goes. He's just finishing off the very top of that. And he's using a graphite paddle just to push down the last of that glass, because when it compresses together, it wants to wrinkle up, basically. But all the glass up around the blowpipe ends up being discarded anyways. That's not really a part of the piece. So it looks like they've got that Swedish overlay over the bubble. Again, he turned that bubble completely inside out, so the color glass is on the very outside layer right now. The next stages for this, after he gets that all smoothed out and cooled down and stabilized, is to gather more glass. So this is just the beginning. Well, it's not the beginning, but it's sort of the middle of the process. Yeah, it's a beginning. And the one thing he was telling us about this technique is you can never get the whole bubble hot. You never, ever want to get, a lot of times when you're blowing glass, you know, heat it up, you have to keep it hot and blow it out quickly. With this technique, everything has to happen meticulously and slowly and very, very controlled. He has to keep his eye on that bubble the entire time, because if he gets it too hot, the air inside of those air traps is going to expand, and everything's going to get fat, everything's going to get distorted. And then when he goes to gather another layer of glass on the top of this, he has to be very careful how he pushes on the glass, so he doesn't squeeze the glass. Let's say he's got a person, right? He doesn't want to squeeze the glass out of the torso up into the head and the feet. So you have this figure with a big head and big feet and really skinny waist. So that could happen here. So he has to be very careful about how he moves the glass after the gather. That's a great shot right there. Maybe if we slow the turns, you guys could really see what's going on in there. So there's a shipwreck and there's sharks. It just looks like sort of a dazzling display of ice right now. But when it's standing still, you can really see the imagery. Wow. Yeah, he's got all the details. So the overlay went really well, was really smooth. And though he made it look easy, it was very difficult. So I think we should give Mika and the team a round of applause for a successful Swedish overlay. I know he appreciates that, because it is very difficult. And there is a chance when you're doing that, and he was telling me that's sort of the critical moment, is putting that bubble inside out over that last layer. It sort of comes down to that move. So here he goes. He's taking another dip of glass. He's putting another thick layer of clear glass on the outside. A lot of these pieces, you see a lot of thick glass. And just adds to the depth. There he goes. That's probably about 25 pounds of glass right there. And on the end of that rod, it probably feels about like 80 pounds of glass. Imagining, you know, having a 20-pound dog there, and then you put him on the end of a shovel, right? That's about what that feels like. So again, he's very careful. It takes a very light touch. Normally, we can take that newspaper and really squeeze the glass wherever we want, but he has to be very careful not to distort the air traps inside. All right, that's looking really, really cool. And you can see how that thick glass is really retaining the heat. It's really holding on to the heat. That's still orange. And they took the gather maybe like 2 minutes ago with one little reheat flash. The thinner the glass is, the more quickly it dissipates heat. So if you're making a little wine glass or something like that, it loses that orange color right away. But something like this where it's maybe 3 inches thick at its thickest point, that's going to hold on to the heat for quite a while. And I do believe they're getting ready to put another layer of glass over the top of that. So Mika's putting on his golf glove. That means he's going to take a big gather. So yes, they are going to gather again. And hopefully, they can fit it through the door of the furnace. That's the one thing I'm worried about here. I think they'll be able to do it. So that extra layer of clear glass is, all that's going to do is just magnify that imagery that's inside the glass. Yes? Yeah, that's a good question. Mika, how big can you go with the double REL? What's the biggest one you've made with the double REL? 60 kilo. 16 kilo. Whew! I was going to say, boy, that's pretty big. How many layers was that? 16 kilos. So that's, boy, that's, I don't know, 30 pounds. Yeah, this is about like this one. Yeah. So about this size. About this size. And it's with this technique, it's more about the weight, really, because one thing you cannot do, and you won't see them, a lot of times when you see us blowing glass in here, somebody will be sitting down at the one side of the bench and blowing while the gaffer is holding the bubble in with the newspaper. Well, he doesn't do that with this, because if you blew that out, you can imagine what would happen to the imagery. It would just go all out of whack. So he just gathers, and there's very, very little, if any, blowing. So it's more like a sculpture process or like making paperweights. And sandblasts through. And he sandblasts, a little fish, maybe about this big, would take an hour or two just to get to the correct depth of carving in order to trap the air bubbles. So here's the big gather. Let's watch this. This is one of the biggest gathers I've seen taken out of that furnace. There we go. What do you guys think of that? That's pretty cool. Yeah. No big deal. We're so thrilled to have Mika here. We've all learned, all the gaffers here are very, very skilled, but we've all learned something new watching him work over the past couple of weeks. And these are techniques we've really never tried, so it's great to see them. We can see examples of REL in our collection here in our 35 Centuries of Glass gallery, but we've never seen anything like this where there's 2 layers of imagery. So he's sort of taken this traditional Swedish technique to a whole nother level, which is a really neat thing to see. And certainly as somebody who works in a glass museum, it's exciting to see somebody take traditional techniques and put their own spin on them. This is going to be a real fantastic piece. Are there any questions online?
There was one that you might not have talked about on if the glass here is different than the glass that he's used to working with in Sweden.
Is the glass here different than the glass he is working with in Sweden? It's similar. He uses a soda lime glass now, but for most of his early career, Miko was working with lead glass, lead crystal. And so it's very different in that it doesn't work the same, but it's kind of similar in that he can do a lot of the same techniques. It just feels a little different when you're working. There he's blowing just a little bit, inflating that core bubble. But he has to be really, really careful. He doesn't want to blow it up too much. Does anybody have any questions here in the amphitheater that I could answer for you? All right. Yes, Carol, thank you. Oh, that's a good question. I'm going to have to ask. I'm going to have to ask the master. Yes, Sven knows. Sorry, Sven is is Mika's representative here.
The first one I think was done
1930.
1930.
Okay. Yeah, it's a fairly new technique. Okay. The question that Carol asked is, how old is the REL technique? So the 1930s, is that what you're saying? Okay. And then Graal, is that about the same?
No, it's even older. So it had its 100 years anniversary last year.
Okay.
So the first Graal was 1960.
Okay. Great. Great. Okay, so the first Graal, which is the technique that Mika is going to do next, is from 1916. So it's 100 years old last year. What's that? Oh, it's really cool. It's really cool. And again, if you want to see some of the other pieces up close and personal, just right around this corner, there's a couple vertical cases. And you can see one of them, actually two of them have some of the pieces he's made here in the past week. You can see an REL with a seahorse in it. There's also this one. If anybody wants to see it up close, I can carry it out and show you. But it's really, really beautiful technique. All right, so you can see Chris is holding some paddles there, protecting Mika's arms. That much glass radiates an enormous amount of heat, so just having your arm near there, even though he has a protective sleeve, he could take that off and find a nice big heat rash in there, almost like a sunburn. So they're using compressed air. And once Mika finds the form that he wants, once he gets it into the shape that he knows is going to be just right for this pattern, I think George will probably come over with a punty, and then they'll finish the top. So sort of like standard glass blowing, which many of you have seen before. Is there anybody here tonight who's never seen glass blowing? I'm curious. Really? Wow, Art, I'm surprised. And he's here showing us and doing us a little residency here in the studio, in the amphitheater. Next year, he's going to come here and teach these techniques at the studio. So that's going to be a great class that anybody's going to want to take. I know I want to take that class. So the very top portion of that that's attached to the blowpipe is the moil. That the big head on the blowpipe, that big piece of steel, sucks a lot of the heat out of the glass. So he's holding a torch on there just to keep it warm because they do not want this piece to get too cold. If it gets too cold, it may fall off the blowpipe. And if it's going to do that, it would do that at this point because everything up on the moil, you can see, is almost clear glass. It doesn't have that orange glow. That means it's right around 1,000 degrees. Did you have a question? No problem.
You already said this, so you don't have to repeat it. So what's the difference between traditional REL and what he's doing?
So traditional REL is one layer of carving covered by glass. This is 2 layers of carving. So he's picked this blank up 2 times, put different layers over top, and carved through it twice. So he made a blank with color on the outside, carved through that color, heated it up again, picked it up, put another layer over, let it cool, carved through it again, and then heated it up again, picked it up, and put another layer over it. So that's the stage he's at right now, is the 3rd layering. Yeah, it's just more steps essentially, but it's the same thing. It's between the layers, exactly. Now with the Swedish Overlay technique, which is key to this technique, to doing REL, it's where you fold a bubble, or yeah, you put it, if you were here for the beginning of the demo, he wrapped a glass bubble around that one to trap the air. But the color's on the outside when he does that, because usually the color's on the very inside, but since he flips the bubble inside out, it puts the color layer of glass as a veneer on the very outside of the bubble. So it's very easy to carve through. All right, so it looks like they're getting ready for the punty here. George Kinnard is at the 2nd workstation, and he's got the punty ready. It's just a bit of glass on the end of a solid steel iron. They're going to attach that to the bottom of the vase that Mika has, and then they'll transfer it onto the iron that George has from one iron to the other. And this is going to allow Mika to open up and finish off the opening of the vase. So he said it's probably about 16 kilos. Yeah, so maybe a little over 30 pounds, maybe 30 pounds or so. Yes. You have a question? Oh, who is this? No? Oh, this is, yeah, that's me. I'm Jeff. If you have any questions, let me know. This is a visiting artist, Miko Johansen from Sweden. And Mika was here for the SOFA Chicago exposition, Sculptural Objects, Functional Art. And he made a detour on the way home, stopped here in Corning to share his skill with our community here. And if there's any glassblowers out there who are interested in learning about these techniques, next summer, Mika is going to be here at the Corning Museum at the studio teaching a class, so make sure to keep your eyes open for that. All right, so they've attached the punty on the bottom of the vase. And if you watch the monitors carefully, you can sort of pick up some of the imagery. But this is definitely one of those pieces you'll want to check out when it's all finished. And I know our team, Amanda Sterling, is probably going to be able to put a picture of this up on the internet when it comes out of the oven. So everything we make has to cool down really, really slowly. And normally our typical demonstrations that we make take about 8 hours or 10 hours to cool down. And that slow cooling is called annealing. Now this piece is a lot different because it's probably at least 2 inches thick at its thickest point. So we'll end up annealing this and cooling this down for almost 40 hours. So it takes a lot longer to evenly cool a thick piece than it does to evenly cool a thin piece. All right, here's the transfer. Let's keep our fingers crossed. This is the tricky part. Again, this is a spot where things could go really well or terribly wrong. So let's see what happens. There we go. All right. Successful transfer. And that's George Kinnard helping Mika turn the glass. And George is very much used to wielding heavy pieces of glass like this and working at, with large-scale glass, so he's happy to help with these heavy pieces. So now they're going to spend some time heating up that top so that Mika can refine the opening. Now where it broke off the blowpipe, it's going to be a little bit jagged up there. It's going to have a bit of a jagged edge, so he may end up trimming some off. He may use his tweezers and grab the end and stretch it out. But again, if he gets it too hot, even just a little bit, the bubble traps are going to go out of whack. So we don't want that to happen. All right, this is a good time to take any questions if anybody has any more questions. Oh, Amanda, maybe we have some questions online. This is usually the longest reheat during the making of any piece. It's called the transfer heat. How long do we think it will take this piece to anneal? I'm guessing at least 40 hours. Yeah. So, yeah, we won't see it for a few days after it's all finished. Great question. Again, yes, the thicker the glass is, the longer it has to anneal. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the giant telescope mirror that's hovering over the glass market. That annealed for 11 months because it's really, really thick. Yes? That's a good question. Why did he go through the sombrero stage? We call that the Swedish Overlay. Why didn't he just gather? Well, because the glass is so fluid, it will flow into the trenches that he's made in the images. So it'll distort. It may trap air, but it's not going to look like a shark or a Viking ship. So by doing it with the Swedish Overlay, it's much more controlled. That glass isn't going to flow into those trenches at all. It just overlaps it, like setting a piece of paper on top of a bowl or something. It traps the air, yeah. It traps it without distorting the image. Yes, sir. Question. What is it? Yes, annealing is, what is that? So that's the process of slowly cooling the glass. And specifically, it's actually the process of holding the glass at a specific temperature until everything reaches that temperature on that piece, whether it's the handle or the spout or the foot or whatever. Everything has to be the same temperature. In our glass, our annealing temperature is about 900 degrees. So we want everything to get to 900 degrees. On Mika's piece, the inside and the outside are going to be vastly different in temperature. So we put it in that oven, we hold it at 900 degrees for many, many hours so that everything gets to that temperature. And then we slowly cool it. And the thicker it is, the slower we cool it so that everything changes temperature at the same rate. So that the outside doesn't cool quicker than the inside, because it's that differential that's going to cause the piece to break. When one part's 500 degrees more or less than another part, it causes so much strain in the glass that it'll break. So the annealing takes the stress out of the glass. Yes, of course. Yes. No, it's not really more brittle. Glass blowers describe it as long glass because it stays hotter longer. It's softer. And on a cutter, when a glass cutter is carving it, it's much softer and easier to cut through. And the lead actually adds brilliance to the glass, so you have a much brighter crystal than a typical soda lime glass, which is it's like window glass, or even the glass we're just using here. It's soda lime. No, it's not really more brittle, no. Mm-mm. Yep. Hey, Jim. Yes. That's a good question. And the answer is no. They didn't develop a thermometer to do that. I've heard tell that glassblowers could stick their hand into essentially their annealing oven, which is totally different back then, and they would count, and however long they were able to count before they had to pull their hand out gave them some clue of how hot the kiln was. So if you can't hold your hand in there for more than 4 seconds, it's 1,000 degrees. Something like that. I'm not exactly sure, but it was definitely by eye, it was by feel. But yeah, they didn't have thermocouples, 200 years ago. Yeah, 2,000 years of trial and error, yeah. Yeah, yes. I mean, we can figure it out scientifically now, but back then it was just based on the knowledge that they've gained from generations of working the glass. Yeah, yeah.
Another question.
Yes.
Specialized purchase, but could this be accomplished with the regular set that we have at the museum?
Yes, that's a good question. So Mika has some specialized tools for doing the Swedish Overlay technique. And we're being asked, can you just use a regular pair of perchofis, which is the wood jacks for this technique? And the answer, of course, is yes, you can. But Mika is one of the foremost experts at this technique, and he does not use the regular perchofis. So that can tell you something. It's probably a lot easier to do with the special tool, and that's why it exists, and that's why one of the experts who does it uses it. So yeah, you can do it with perchofis. I've tried it with perchofis, and it was very easy to give up. But I've done it with this tool, and I felt a lot better about it. So yes, you can, but maybe you want to try the special tool too. All right. So it looks like they're getting ready to place this piece into the annealing oven. You see Chris Rochelle has that silver suit on. That means he's going to be loading this in there. He's going to be sticking half his body into the annealer. So he wants to be protected from the heat. Wow, that looks fantastic. Very, very cool. All right, a couple sharp taps to the joint where the punty is attached to the vase. A sharp tap to the iron will release it. All right, there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. Into the oven that goes. That piece is still around 1,000 degrees. It looks like it's even hotter than that inside, probably more like 1,200, 1,800 degrees on the very inside, the very core. All right, let's hear it for Miko Johansen. Incredible, incredible piece. That is the double Ariel. All right. Well, great. This is probably a good time to take a little break. We'll take a little break, and then Mika is going to be doing another pickup, and he's going to make a totally different piece using a technique called growl, which is another traditional Swedish glassblowing technique. So make sure to try some of those beers. Check out the bands. N-Train is incredible. You guys are going to have a great time. And we'll be starting up here again in just a couple of minutes. If you have any questions, let us know.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get back at it. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to 2300. How about a warm welcome for Mika Johansen? Mika's been hanging out here in the hot shop with us for about 2 weeks now, and it's really been an absolute pleasure to work with him and to learn a little bit more about some amazing Swedish techniques. Mika started blowing glass years and years ago in the Orrefors factory. It's a factory with a long and storied history in Sweden. He's from the Crystal Kingdom of Sweden, from Småland, and we're really, really excited to have him here in Corning. This is the last time he was in the United States was 16 years ago when he took a class with Lino out at Pilchuck. So it's been a while since he's been around the States here, and in the meantime, he's really made quite a name for himself, making amazing work that's really based in Swedish tradition, but he's really taken it a step farther and sort of put his own spin on it. So if you watched the last demonstration, Mika did a really beautiful Ariel piece, which is a technique like you see here, which has a trapped air bubble, and he creates imagery in the trapped air bubbles by a sandblasting and layering process. So growl is a technique which uses the same process of layering colors and sandblasting, but rather than going for relief to trap an air bubble, the point in growl is to have a pattern, to have imagery in the colored glass. So we made a similar, Mika made a similar blank, and he spent some time when that blank was cold, covering over it with mask, drawing on that mask the pattern that he wanted, then cutting that out with an X-Acto knife, and then sandblasting it to take away layers of color and leave a design. And here in just a moment, we'll see what that design is. Yeah, so there was a question online about how the piece maintains its shape when it's cooling down. When we put that piece in the annealing oven, if you were watching here online, you saw that it was still glowing orange. That's really because it's so massive. That piece was, who knows, probably 3 inches thick or more, the wall thickness. So it was glowing orange in the annealer. Even though it was glowing orange, that was mostly in the core, the glass was cool enough that it won't lose its shape at all in the annealer. So the trick to keeping glass from deforming in the annealer is to put it in there at the right temperature. You can't put it in there too hot. So now back to what's going on here at the bench. Mika has formed a collar. He's formed a little bit of glass on the end of this hollow stainless steel blowpipe, and that's going to stick to the growl blank that he has prepared and that is warming up in our oven. We have a pickup oven over kind of on the left side of the stage there, and that growl blank, it's kind of like a cup. It's sitting in there with the open end up. And Mika will get this nice and hot, and he'll press it right down onto the rim of that cup, and then he'll have it picked up on the end of the blowpipe. It'll come out of there, and you'll be able to see the nice pattern that he has sandblasted and carved into that growl blank. So the growl blank is around 1,100 degrees. It's a little bit hotter than our annealing oven. If we left the growl blank in there too long at 1,100 degrees, it would deform. The annealing oven is at 900 degrees, and at that temperature, the glass is stable. At 1,000 degrees, it would eventually soften. It might slump and move around in there a little bit. But we want it to be a little bit soft so that when Mika picks that up and then takes it into the reheating furnace here, which is at over 2,000 degrees, 2,300 degrees, it's not going to crack or break. So it's all about very precise temperatures. All right, here we go for the first hold your breath moment of the evening. Stick that on there. He wants to make sure that it's stable. It's quite a lot of weight that he's attached on the end of the pipe there. And then he wants to get it right into that furnace. You don't want to dally too long, because if it loses too much heat and he reintroduces it into that 2,300 degree furnace, it might crack. So now, because the way that he achieved the pattern in this is by carving it with sand, by sandblasting, he's actually going to spend some time smoothing the surface of that out. There's some relief in the pattern. If you watched the last demo, you saw that that relief was important, right, to trap the air bubbles. On this one, he doesn't want to get any air bubbles. He wants it to be free of bubbles. We're just going for the pattern. So he's going to heat that and then roll it on this tabletop over here to smooth out the surface. I just brought this out to show you what one of these growl blank looks like before it's carved. So this is a growl blank that has colored glass on the very surface. This will be masked and carved to reveal a pattern, much like the one that Mika is working on right now. Yes? That's a great question. When he's sandblasting these blanks, he's sandblasting on the outside. All this color is on the surface. You watched the last demo, right? And you saw him turn one bubble inside out over another bubble, right? That technique, it's called the Swedish Overlay, is essential to get the colored glass on the surface. So we're seeing him use that Swedish Overlay in two ways. One, to trap air bubbles, the other way to get thin layers of color on the surface so that you can easily sandblast through this. If the color is on the inside, obviously you can't sandblast it away, right? It needs to be right on the outside surface. Okay, so kind of a slow and methodical approach to reheating the surface here. He doesn't want to just go in there and get that really hot and molten drippy because he doesn't really want to lose all the pattern that he's worked so hard to achieve. He wants to maintain a nice pattern in there. He doesn't want to melt it away too much. For us, it's exciting to have a glassmaker here. From the Swedish tradition, we're actually in a building here. This is the former Steuben factory. In terms of towns in the United States that have a history of glassmaking, Corning is about as good as it gets. People have made glass in this town, in Corning, for 150 years now. And the very place where we're standing tonight, people have made glass in this building since 1951. And a lot of the traditions of glassmaking in Corning are Swedish traditions. We have a picture of the first glassmaker in Corning in the back of our shop here. It's a guy named Sven Overstrom who emigrated to the United States to work at Steuben. And so the traditions of glassmaking in Corning here are very much the traditions of Swedish glassmaking. So it's a little bit like a homecoming for Mika to come here and to work with us tonight and to work here in Corning where the Swedish tradition has had so much influence. I don't know if anybody's been able to pick out any pattern yet. Has anybody noticed any of the imagery in the surface of this bubble yet? It's kind of hard to pick out just yet. When we're gathering glass on this and blowing up, it'll become more and more evident. Or when he slows down, when he stops turning quite so fast, it'll become more evident exactly the pattern that he has in there. As we go along, if anybody has any questions, just feel free to wave at me. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. Working with Mika tonight, I guess I should introduce the rest of the crew. Starting over there on the right side is Chris Rochelle. Jeff Mack is there on the doors. George Kennard has been helping out with turning the pipe. And Tom Ryder over here. All glassmakers here at Corning. Chris and George have worked here quite a long time. George is probably our most senior glass worker. But a lot of talent on the stage. And I was just chatting with somebody about how everybody knows what to do. And really it's just a factor of knowing the process of everybody being good glassmakers themselves and a little bit of definition of the roles. We all know that George is going to help when Mika's gathered on this a couple times and a piece gets a little bit heavy. We know that George is going to be the main guy helping Mika turn. And then Chris and Jeff and Tom will sort of pitch in as needed, helping out, shielding, keeping the papers wet, keeping the doors on the furnace open when they need to be open. So really, because everybody on the stage has had a lot of experience doing this, everybody's a pretty good glassmaker themselves. It makes the teamwork look as if these guys have worked together for a long time, when in fact, we really haven't. We've worked together with Mika, we've worked together with Mika for about 2 weeks now. But really, the process of glassmaking is such that by and large, if you're a good glassmaker, you're a pretty good assistant too. You can see he's getting that hotter and hotter. The colored glass on the surface is glowing orange. And now he's going to actually use a scoop, use a block to really start to smooth out that surface. Again, he's getting rid of any relief on the surface. sandblasting process. And he's working on getting that a little bit more round because he'll be gathering more glass on top of this, and that having a nice even round shape is good for gathering up. All right, anybody see any of the pattern yet? Yep, I heard a dragon. We've got a dragon in there. Now, Mika wanted me to make sure to point out that this is a Swedish dragon because the colors of the dragon are blue and yellow, like the Swedish flag. So he wanted to make sure I pointed that out. I think secretly he also wants me to mention the World Cup prelim the other night where Sweden played Italy. And I don't know if that means anything to anybody, but Mika was here listening to the game where the Swedish soccer team was playing Italy, and he was pretty excited about that. You notice the shape of this growl blank here is a little bit longer, and having a longer blank gives you a nice canvas to carve on. It's easier to put a mask on this and to carve it and to draw on it if it's kind of longer and straight on the sides. And now he's working on getting it a little bit more round to gather over. So this technique is called growl, G-R-A-A-L. And I asked Mika what it meant, and he said it actually is derived from the word grail, like the Holy Grail, like a cup. But other than that, he didn't really know. I mean, I think that's a good enough definition, right? That it's a name derived from grail. So really, this is all about getting this into the shape and getting it to the temperature and getting the surface smooth and getting ready for gathering over it. Might not be a good idea to put that there, huh? Mika has his own studio. I can't quite remember. I think the town is called Nybro. Is that right? Nybro. So if you're ever in the Crystal Kingdom, swing by. He has his own studio and a little gallery there where he sells his work. And again, he learned at the famous Swedish glass house called Orrefors. And that's actually where this growl technique was first developed. And I thought I remember him saying that growl was developed in the 60s, but was it earlier than that? In 1916. Okay. All right. So said they first started doing this in 1916 at the Orrefors factory. All right. So now, hey George, can you turn slow so we can see that pattern well? So now you can see there's the dragon, the Swedish dragon. And then there's some dancing figures around it. John with some great camera work there. Thanks, guys. It'll be fun to see how this pattern develops as this blows out. We actually have some, when you're heading out, if you come down here and go by these showcases, there are several of the pieces that Mika has made over the last 2 weeks here in the showcases where you can kind of see some of the other pieces that he has made using these techniques. There's a couple Ariel pieces over there and a couple growl pieces. Yeah.
You mentioned the World Cup.
Yeah.
Does he follow any Swedish hockey players like Victor Hägglund?
Oh yeah. That we were talking about that the other night. We talked about soccer, and Mika said he was actually, but you also follow hockey, right? ice hockey. You follow the Swedish players, yeah, a little bit. He was a soccer player himself, so I know he's a little bit more into soccer. All right, so now it's just a matter of getting that the right temperature to gather over. He has a lot of time and effort into forming that growl blank, and when you go into that tank of molten glass, you don't want to lose any of the definition of surface or form on that growl blank as you gather over it. So right now, into the pot of molten glass, that furnace holds 1,000 pounds of glass at 2,100 degrees. You dip the pipe down in there, turn it around, and spool it on there just like you'd get honey out of a dish. It comes out with a nice big gather. He just made that look really easy, right? You just go in there and twirl it around and you come out with some pretty glass. But definitely gathering glass, there's a technique to it, there's an art to it. And now he's got George helping out, turning the pipe, keeping it moving. George is like power steering, right? You know, he's the one like being the strength and the motor on the pipe right now. Mika's still in command here. He's still driving, but George is providing a little bit of the backup. Yeah. It's fun to see how the heat from the gather warms the growl blank underneath, and you can see the colors that we know are blue and white and some others have all turned orange once again. You can also see the depth in the piece. There's a small bubble on the inside and then layers of thick glass and layers of color. So when the piece is thick like this, you really see that depth. It's still moving around a little bit, wobbling around on the end of the pipe there. It's quite a bit of weight. If you can imagine holding a rock about this big, that's about how much it's weighing. Glass is about the same density as stone. But this does have a little bit of a bubble inside of it, so it is a little bit hollow, but still, that's quite heavy. But it's attached by a pretty small point, and it's moving around quite a lot, so it can be kind of ornery to handle. Mika's working together with George. He's saying keep it horizontal. Tom is blowing through the pipe a little bit. Holding it down like that. Every move is deliberate. Holding it down like that helps to stretch and lengthen it. You can see that pattern develop. One of the interesting things that I kind of see happening now is that when you have colors distributed unevenly on a bubble like this, sometimes it blows out a little bit unevenly. One of the things that I can kind of see happening is that dragon is a big patch of color, right? It's a big patch of color, and it seems like the bubble is blowing out a little bit more there. So it really is very helpful for him to form the glass with the newspaper as Tom is blowing through the pipe to sort of prevent that from happening, to try to keep it to all blowing out more evenly and not following colors that might be softer or hotter than others. Yeah, a gentleman asked about the wooden tool that we use. We have some blocks that we use that are American blocks here. We actually also have some Swedish blocks. The wooden tools that we generally use here are made of cherry or sometimes apple or pear wood. Miko was actually telling us that they use a wood called alder quite a lot in Sweden. And he was saying the reason they do that is because you can dry alder wood out, and it will split, it will crack, but when you soak it up, it will close right back up again. And so they like to use the alder wood for a lot of the Swedish blocks. All right, and back into the heat. Anybody else have any questions so far since I'm up here? Anybody curious about anything? It's good to see so many people out here for 2300. We're excited to be back in the 2300 season. We got another one coming up in December. And then all through winter, January, February, March, and May. We skip April, but January, February, March, and May we'll be doing 2300 events here. So stop back and see us. It's great to have everybody out for the Finger Lakes beer tastings tonight. If you haven't, up in the Innovation Center, they're doing the tastings this evening. N-Train is here, a fantastic band if you haven't checked them out yet. But we're really happy that 2300 is part of the community here in Corning, and that it really gives everybody something in the winter to look forward to. It's a great night out. It's good to have everybody here. All right, and back again to the furnace. George is heating the glass. He's rolling it on a rolling yoke. We have tracks built right into the floor, and really the point is keeping the fulcrum close to the heavy glass so it's easier to handle. They're going to actually make this kind of a flattened or lobe-shaped vessel, and Mika's just setting up right now. He's setting up that flattened area so he has the pattern just right when he flattens it. He's going to come out of the bench and use the cork paddles here to squish it flat. We love this. It's dramatic. You might get a little smoke up there. The cork burns a little bit, but it's a great tool. It's nice and soft. It doesn't mark the glass up. But it does burn a tiny little bit. So we'll just pause and flatten. It's fun here too because you get to see how much the glass is dropping. This is why we usually try to keep the pipe turning all the time, because it's always falling towards the floor. I was talking to Jeff the other day, and it's easy to recognize Mika as an absolute master glassblower. And you know, we're really impressed by the technique, but one of the things that we've grown to know about him too is what an excellent draftsman he is. He develops and he draws all the patterns that is on all of his objects, and that's no small task. It takes a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge of this process to be able to develop a pattern that will be successful, and then just to be able to draw it. He just takes the growl blank and he just draws it right on there, just like you're drawing on a sheet of paper. So it's very impressive. I mean, he's an incredible craftsman, very, very talented in forming glass. But really not to be overlooked is the experience he has in rendering these beautiful images on his objects as well. So there you can see just a few heats and a little bit of a squeeze. He's drastically changed the shape of this piece, flattened it out nicely. A couple more touch-ups here, and then they'll be ready for the transfer. The opening for this object is where it's attached to the blowpipe. We'll eventually break this bubble free from the blowpipe. Where it was attached, there'll be an opening. He can work on expanding that out to finish the piece off. And again, on your way out, make sure you check out some of the finished pieces over in the showcases over here, some of the other things that Mika's made over the 2 weeks that he's been here as our guest artist in the Amphitheater Hot Shop here at Corning Museum of Glass. Mika's actually coming back this summer to teach a class on this technique. So he'll be over at the studio teaching a course on Graal and Ariel and the Swedish Overlay technique this summer. So if you blow glass and you want to learn that, I would highly recommend it. If you don't yet blow glass and want to learn it, if you start tomorrow, you might by July when he's teaching, you might be good enough to actually get something out of the class. But if you've never blown glass before and you want to learn Graal from Mika this summer, you better start right now. But really, as a course for glassmakers who have some experience and who can handle the material, this is a great technique. One of the things I've learned about Swedish overlays and the Graal technique is that it's a lot more versatile than I first thought. Over the last couple of weeks, Mika has shown us lots and lots of ways of getting different color effects using the Graal, the Swedish overlay technique. And again, basically, in short, the Swedish overlay technique is folding one bubble over another, so the exterior of the second bubble, or the interior of the second bubble becomes the exterior when they're folded together. That's a pretty poor way of explaining what a Swedish overlay is, but basically you're turning one bubble inside out over another. Now this is a very important technique to learn here, the flatten the bottom on the floor technique. I was actually just talking to one of the fellows who helped us construct this new Amphitheater Hot Shop, Joe Dubendorfer, and he asked me how our floor was holding up. So we've been in this space, you know, since March of 2015, and the one question he had for me is, how's your floor holding up? And I said it's been holding up pretty good. But we haven't had Mika, you know, flattening the bottoms of his pieces on the floor all the whole time. It's not a problem, though. It's fine. I'm just making fun. All right, so beautiful shape. Really what he's been doing is getting the form on about the bottom 2/3 of this vessel. So kind of from the shoulder down, that's the part of the form that he's been most concerned with up until this point. On the punty, you really are working on the top third of the vessel. And I don't know if he's going to leave the top of this sort of small or if he's going to open it all the way up. The one that he did over, well, actually did a couple of them over here. One is really small on the top, and one is opened all the way up. So I didn't talk to him about what he's doing. Chris just let me know he's probably going to go for a smaller opening on the top of this one. Yeah. All right, a couple more questions from Cyberworld. One of the questions was, what is the pad that he's using to form the glass on the table there? We often use newspaper. We also have a newspaper koozie here. It's a graphite pocket. It's a kind of a woven graphite fiber material that you slip a newspaper into. So there's newspaper in there to act as insulation, but it's sheathed in this graphite woven cloth pocket. So it's a nice tool because it stays a little cleaner than the newspaper. Mika also uses, and this is something I hadn't seen before, he uses a very thick paper. It's almost like watercolor paper. If he wants to paper the glass when it's fresh out of the furnace, he uses that thick watercolor paper. And I hadn't seen anyone do that here in the States before. Using the newspaper to form the glass is great because you can use the contour of your hand to get a shape in the material. I think there was another question, but I forgot it already. Was there another question, Amanda? Yeah, the other question was about our furnace, the 1,000-pound furnace. Believe it or not, our 1,000-pound furnace hasn't shut off since we first commissioned this shop in January of 2015. So the glass melting furnace has been on since then. If we were to shut it off, we would let it cool over at least a week, and if we were then to turn it back on again, we would want to bring it up to temperature and charge it probably over the course of a week and a half. So a 1,000-pound furnace full of glass isn't something that you turn off every day when you're done. That furnace has stayed on for many years now. All right, so right now they're in the process of transferring it. George has brought over a punty. They've attached it to the center bottom of this object. Going to turn a couple of times to make sure that it's running true. This is a point at which temperature is as crucial as ever in this process. You want the neck where this vase is attached to the blowpipe to be cool enough that it will snap, but you don't want it to be so cold that you risk breaking this entire vase. So the piece is pretty cool. You can tell that that black color is really coming out underneath, that you don't see much orange in there. So we're really kind of in a danger zone in terms of temperatures. George is making sure that the punny is set so it's not too wobbly when we transfer it. This is a heavy piece, and you want it to be stable on that finishing iron. I think they're all happy with the temperatures. A little bit of water on the neckline. Bring it up, tap, pipe comes off, and there we got it. Nice job, guys. Now back into the heat to warm up that opening. There you can see that nice even neck on there, but it's quite thick. The glass on the top of this piece is, you know, at least a half-inch thick, maybe a little bit more, maybe 5/8. So they're going to be working on getting some heat back in there and forming the top of this. And again, now we know that the top of this vase will sort of be closed up a little bit. They're not going to open it up wide. Was that a question wave? I think that was just a wave. Hey, Ray. Good to see you guys. What do you guys think? Is Mika doing a good job? Awesome to have such a skilled glassmaker working here with us. It's been, like I said, it's been a great couple of weeks working with Mika. An absolute honor to have him in the shop here. One thing that I think every glassblower I know, one thing that I know about every glassmaker is that they love to learn new tricks and new techniques. And, you know, we've been blowing glass for quite a long time. George has been blowing glass for over 25 years now. Jeff's been blowing glass for a long time. Tom and Chris. And you know what? We still love it. You know, the more you know, the more you've done this, the more you don't know anything, and the more that you can learn. And so it's just great to learn something new, and to have worked with Mika and to learn how to do these overlays properly. Everybody's tried in the last couple of weeks. Everybody on the team has gotten a chance to try the overlays. We haven't all finished a piece off. We haven't done our growls and our RELs yet, but it's been good for us to be able to learn from Mika and to explore this new process, new to us. All right, so working on bringing the top of that closed a little bit. He's giving himself a little lip. He pulled that out just a little bit to give himself something to grab onto. Chris is working hard to try to keep his hand out of the heat. That vase, again, the body of that piece is anywhere between about 1,200 degrees and 2,000 degrees. So it's throwing off a lot of temperature. And at this point, Mika is working with his hands within inches of that 1,500 degree glass. And so Chris is really crucial here to keep his hands from getting too hot. He's trusting George to get the right temperature up there on the top. He doesn't want to get it too hot and crumple that opening closed. Chris is actually holding a mandrel in the opening, and Mika's going to squeeze right down on that mandrel so that we know that opening doesn't squeeze shut and that it has a nice, even, round finish when he taps this little crown off of there. There we go, just like that. We use the hot torch right up there on the rim. And we have a nice opening on this sculptural vessel. All right, now a couple heats just to work the shoulders. When they were working on cutting that top down, you can see that the top became a little bit round. Glass likes to be round. As you're heating it and as you're turning it, kind of likes to ball up. And so the top of this has gotten a little wider maybe than he's looking for. So now it's going to be a matter of working that back down a little bit. And then, of course, always the final process is that slow cool, the annealing process. Looks like they might blow it up a little bit more. Chris is getting the Soffietta ready, puffer cone. He can actually hold it in the opening and puff through the end a little bit to get a little more volume in there. Chris heated up that cone so it doesn't, you don't get any little cracks or anything on this. A little light shaping, a little puff through that puffer cone, getting a little more volume up top, making it a little bit thinner. Nice. Once again, everybody, great to see so many folks out here for 2300. Next one is December 21st, I think. We're always the third Thursdays. Glass artist is going to be Nisha Bansal. She's an artist from upstate New York here. I'm not sure who the band's going to be. Was that a question way up here? About how heavy is the piece? It's a chunk. It's a pretty good amount of glass there. I would, if I had to guess, I would say it's maybe at or just over 20 pounds. That doesn't sound like a whole lot. I've got an 18-month-old, and he weighs a little bit more than 20 pounds, and that can get awfully heavy if you're carrying it around, you know. So glass is kind of like a baby. They don't always weigh a whole lot, but they're wiggly, you know, and they're always moving around, and they get heavy. So 20 pounds might not be much if it were something that you could just hold close to your body, but this is probably over 20 pounds out on the end of the pipe, and they've been working nonstop with it for about an hour now. So really one of the ways to manage that is to have a team to hand off the work. You can see Mika and George have kind of shared the heavy lifting on this piece. And I've learned both of these guys love this stuff. They love making this heavy glass. Tom kind of likes it too. When I make glass, I like to make wine glasses and things that aren't quite so heavy. All right, a little more shaping up here at the top. A little more volume. Looking good. Look at that dragon. That's so great. I think Mika's had fun working here with the team too. It's great to have a shop with this capacity. It's great to have a team that has this skill, and makes it easy and makes it fun, for sure. All right, Chris is getting out the silver suit here. That means we're getting close to the end, close to winding this down and getting it into the annealing oven. Another quick little swing. Now it's just a matter of evening out the temperatures. I don't know if you can see it. I can see that the top around the opening is a little more orange than the bottom. That means there's a heat differential there, right? The bottom is a little darker, a little more black. You want to try to get that heat even from top to bottom in this piece. When we put this in the annealing oven, the more even the heat is when it goes in, the better chance you'll have of it coming out successfully, of having a good anneal on the piece and making sure that it doesn't crack. So because we can see that the top is a little warmer than the bottom, you can see him using that hot torch on the bottom to try to even it out a little bit. All right, so now we're just winding down, satisfied with the shape, not quite yet satisfied with the temperature. So we're going to make sure the temperatures are nice and even, and we'll get it into the cooling oven there. Now, one thing I have to share with you, and this is just a sort of glassblower superstition, is that we don't like to clap until this is in the oven and the door is closed, because there's lots of things that can still happen on the way to that oven. We don't want to put this away too hot. This one actually won't stand up in the oven. The last vase that we did, if you saw, was actually flat on the bottom and it could stand up on the oven. If you noticed on this one, there's going to be a little button of clear glass left on the bottom that needs to be ground away at the end when we're done. So this won't stand in the oven. This is actually going to lie on its side, so it's even more essential that the temperature is spot on. If it's a little bit too soft, too hot still, you'll pick up some texture from the floor of the oven and it might collapse or flatten a little bit on the side. So really this wind down process here is essential to make sure that temperature is just right to go in the oven. And I notice now that the top is a little less orange, a little more even. Now the other day too, we actually lost one of these pieces because of a little water crizzle on the bottom. And so Jeff is going to hit the bottom with a hot torch, make sure that any little crizzle there won't run. All right, so getting ready for the detachment here. Again, remember, no clapping until we got it in that oven, but then I want you guys to go crazy for Mika Johansen here. A little bit of torch on the bottom. Over to the oven. There it is, safe and sound, everybody. Mika Johansen. All right. So much fun. Nice job, George, Jeff, Tom.